The latest Russian atrocity in Ukraine, a missile strike on a shopping mall, thronging with people. President Zelensky says 1,000 shoppers were inside the centre, which was of no strategic value. At least 10 are known to have died. There are fears of many more. It coincides with the start of the G7 meeting in Germany, where leaders pledged to support Ukraine for as long as it takes.
What's really struck me in the last couple of days has been the amazing consistency of our resolve, the continuing unity of the G7.
So is the timing then of this attack pure chance, or was Putin making a point to G7 leaders? We speak to our correspondents in Ukraine. Also tonight, in Birmingham, a woman's dead after a house was flattened by a gas explosion. A man was badly injured in the blast, rescued just in time by neighbours.
We essentially started digging him out of the rubble. We managed to save him as the fire was getting closer and closer. We managed to get him out of the building onto a mattress.
Allegations of racism in rugby, the shocking testimony of a former player after years at the highest level of the game. Criminally underpaid as barristers walk out on strike, claims that legal aid pays less than the minimum wage, and UK players are out in force on day one of Wimbledon.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. The Prime Minister has tonight condemned a Russian attack on a shopping centre in Ukraine, which has killed at least 10 people and injured dozens more. Missiles struck the mall in the middle of the afternoon, causing a massive fire. More than 1,000 people were inside the centre at the time, and there are fears that many more may have died. It came as leaders of the G7 countries held a summit and pledged to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. And we'll have more on that in just a moment. But first, our correspondent John Ray reports from Ukraine on the deadly and shocking attack on civilians.
On the day world leaders met to show their support for Ukraine, Russia is still bent on its destruction. A missile strike on a shopping centre, engulfed by towering flames. It had been crowded, with perhaps 1,000 innocent people inside, according to local authorities. While rescue workers battled the fires, inside, survivors described scenes of horror, of walls beginning to fall in. Some managed to make their own stumbling way through the smoke and the chaos to the fresh air outside. So far, at least 40 people are known to have been injured, many seriously. The attack happened in the city of Kremenchuk, in the center of Ukraine. This government official said emergency services were clearing the wreckage as quickly as they could. The roof, he said, had collapsed, and a search was underway for the living and the dead. This evening, President Zelensky said the shopping centre was of no strategic value. He accused Russia of sabotaging people's attempts to live a normal life. All this follows yesterday's strike on an apartment building in Kyiv, the first attack on the capital for 3 weeks that left one dead and several injured. And in the east of the country, intense fighting continues. Ukraine still has troops in the city of Lysychansk, its last significant grip on the Luhansk province. But at huge cost, the Russians are closing in. 4 months into this war, and there is no easing of the pain or the suffering. Ukraine needs its international partners now more than ever. John Ray, ITV News, Ukraine.
Well, a shopping centre attack in an area of central Ukraine that has seen few previous strikes underlines just how Western support for Ukraine remains as vital as ever. Even before news of it reached G7 leaders at their summit in Germany, they had put on a united front. President Zelensky addressed them, saying he wants the war to end before the winter sets in. From the summit, here's our Europe editor James Mates with the latest.
The joint session with Ukraine's President Zelensky came just hours before the horrendous news from Kremenchuk. But even before this latest outrage, the summit here was remarkable for the solidity of their backing for Ukraine. Gone was any talk of pushing Kiev towards a negotiated settlement. Instead came promises from President Biden that for the first time advanced air defense systems were on their way, and that if this war is to end, Zelensky will decide the terms.
What's really struck me in the last couple of days has been the amazing consistency of our resolve, the continuing unity of the G7. That was absolutely shone through in the conversation over the last couple of days.
We've heard this before from the Prime Minister, of course, but now even the once cautious German Chancellor is completely on board.
We understood that the policies of all our countries are very much aligned, and this is, I think, the good message, that we are taking tough decisions, that we are also cautious, that we will help the Ukraine as much as is possible, but that we also avoid that there will be a big conflict between Russia and NATO.
There are significant costs to this tough line, of course, to the world economy and to food and energy prices. Many of those costs falling hardest on some of the leaders from the developing world invited to attend this summit. Russia has been banking on an economic crisis that breaks Western resolve. So far, at least, that calculation has proved to be wrong. Boris Johnson has led the condemnation of today's attack, saying it will only strengthen the resolve of both the UK and the G7 to stand by Ukraine. But they will all know that days like this only make their task harder. Thunderclouds are this evening closing in around Schloss Elmau on the last evening of this summit in the Bavarian Alps. Stormy days may be coming.
James is close to that G7 summit in Germany tonight. James, high-level talks on Ukraine. Is the timing of this latest attack on the civilians in the shopping centre pure coincidence?
Well, Mary, it's very difficult to know what's going on in President Putin's mind, but I think we can only judge his intentions by his actions. We saw the attack on a residential area of Kiev last night. The Americans say they have counted 60 separate missile attacks in the last few days, way more than normal. And then this attack today, which, however much the Russians may say, look, you know, shopping centres and warehouses and things are legitimate economic targets, to do it in the daytime rather than at night when there are going to be people in it. Well, I mean, that speaks volumes for itself. If the Russian intention is somehow to weaken Western resolve, well, it absolutely clearly hasn't worked here. I mean, it was just a few days ago that the British were worried about where the French were going on all this. One of Germany's top foreign policy advisors was talking openly about needing to talk to Putin. Well, that has all gone now, and the message has been absolutely solid. And 6 of these 7 leaders, all except Japan, go on from here to Madrid straight away for the NATO summit, where a really important announcement is being made that the NATO Rapid Reaction Force, currently 40,000 troops who are on absolute ready standby, that number is going to be increased to 300,000, with many more deployed in Eastern Europe. So Western resolve not only to look after Ukraine, but to protect its own borders is certainly stiffening.
OK, James Mates in Germany there, thank you. Well, back here, a woman has died and a man is in a critical condition in hospital after a gas explosion destroyed a house in Birmingham. The property in King's Standing was flattened by the blast last night. 6 other homes were damaged. From the scene, our Midlands reporter Ellie Pitt sends this report.
A home now lies in fragments, possessions strewn across the street. The cause? A gas explosion. Those who were nearby at the time are still shaken today.
I was driving past outside the house, and at the same time it just exploded, and I had my kids and family with me, my wife, and it was really scary and it was shocking.
My whole vision pretty much like went white. All you could hear was the boom, obviously. Parts of the building flew about 20 foot in the air and 40 foot outwards.
House is gone now.
The blast happened just after 8:30 last night. Neighbours immediately ran to help and risked their own safety when amongst the debris they saw signs of life.
So I hopped over a fence and saw this hand sticking out of the rubble, and I shouted for more help. A few more people arrived after that, but we just essentially started digging him out of the rubble. We managed to save him as the fire was getting closer and closer. Managed to get him out of the building onto a mattress.
The injured man is critically ill in hospital. A woman who was also in the property at the time has died. The fire service and gas teams are now investigating what caused the explosion.
Our focus in the sort of the short term is to try and reduce or minimise any further impact. There's a lot of people who've been displaced.
Natasha and her family have been allowed home quickly to get some more clothes. Last night they had to leave in a hurry.
He said to me, "But is it safe in here?" And then all of a sudden the police come up and they're kicking us out and evacuating us up, and we're in pyjamas and literally throwing out with no shoes on. I had to grab their shoes on the way out, and yeah, it's just sheer panic.
The rubble and ruins will eventually be removed, but the scar left on this street will take longer to fade. The fire service have told me tonight that they'll be here for days working on their investigation. But what's really struck me today has been the story of heroism that's come out. 10, 12 men rushed down here and into the house as it was collapsing and on fire to pull out the injured man. This is a community that fought hard to save one of its own.
Ellie Pitt in King's Standing, thank you. Moving on now, Sir John Major has angered victims of the infected blood scandal by blaming what happened on, as he put it, incredibly bad luck. Now, that came as the former Prime Minister gave evidence to the inquiry about his role in the Treasury at the time. Sir John said no amount of money could have offered a true level of compensation. And more than 3,000 people died after being given blood infected with HIV and hepatitis C. And campaigners accuse successive governments of refusing to accept responsibility. From the inquiry, here's our correspondent, Rachel Younger.
I was 8 years old and had a swollen knee, and I was misdiagnosed with haemophilia.
It's been over 4 decades since Stuart McLean was given contaminated blood which he didn't need and which no one told him had given him hepatitis C. When he finally found out a few years ago, it nearly killed him.
I just thought Hep C. Everywhere I looked online, it went to the worst possible scenario. Lost my career with depression, lost everything basically. Nearly lost my life. I stood at Motorway Bridge to end it all.
A passing neighbour dissuaded him, but Stuart is one of up to 30,000 people given contaminated blood by the NHS, and thousands have since died. Giving evidence, this former Prime Minister drew gasps of disbelief by suggesting misfortune played a part.
There's no amount of compensation you can give that could actually compensate for what had happened to them. What had happened to them was incredibly bad luck, awful, and it was not something that anybody was unsympathetic to.
But the risks should have been clear. The NHS began importing blood products from the US in 1972. Just 2 years later came the first warnings of contamination and hepatitis. By 1983, the UK government had been told AIDS was being spread through them. But it was 1991 before American blood products stopped being used. For Stuart, bad luck doesn't begin to cover it.
And he calls that bad luck, knowing that our government brought them products from America? That's not bad luck, that's irresponsible.
Mark Ward was given the same blood products as a child with haemophilia. By his 20s, they'd given him HIV.
If you ignore AIDS, it could be the death of you.
Just as public health campaigns like this were stoking fear. He feels he's lived with government complacency for decades, and today was more of the same.
He was in charge of the country whilst we carried on dying, carried on being infected, and he never asked why. That's nothing to do with luck.
Away from the inquiry, these vials hold not blood but messages to those who've died. A reminder that whatever the outcome, for too many, it will be too late. Rachel Younger, ITV News.
And if you have been affected by any of the issues in that report, there are details about where you can get support on our website, and that's at itv.com/news. Now, a man has been arrested on suspicion of murdering 35-year-old Zara Alina in East London. Zara was found with serious head injuries in Ilford in the early hours of Sunday morning. Mark McCullen is at the scene tonight. Mark, what are police saying happened?
Well, Mary, this is a crime that has caused a great level of concern, fear and disbelief in this area. A woman murdered close to a busy road in what investigators believe was an attack by a stranger. Police have named the woman as Zara Alina, a 35-year-old who lived locally. It was along a stretch of road a few hundred yards from Gants Hill tube station where police were called to in the early hours of yesterday morning. Zara had suffered serious head injuries and died later that morning. Now, this murder will obviously raise further serious questions about women's safety. On that point, the Metropolitan Police say that officers are working every day to improve safety in public spaces for women and girls. As for the investigation itself, officers say it is developing quickly, and in the last couple of hours they've confirmed a 29-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder. That arrest was made in the local area this afternoon, and the man remains in police custody.
Mark McCullen in Ilford in East London, thank you. Well, there's plenty more still to come on the ITV Evening News, including shocking claims of racism in rugby union by a former England player from teammates who, he says, thought it was banter.
When the word slave's getting chucked around, there's a line. Trust me, you've well overstepped that line.
Crisis in the courts. Barristers are out on the picket lines protesting over pay. And 4 months after fleeing their Ukrainian homes, we've returned to Poland, to the first school that welcomed children in and to see the hope of many families now finally able to return home.
It's complicated feelings because I'm happy to return and I'm afraid to return at the same time.
It is a report that really shows the amazing kindness of strangers to all those Ukrainian families, and that is coming up just after 7 p.m. See you after the break. Hello and welcome back. A former England rugby union player has told ITV News how racism is rife throughout the sport. Luther Burrell says it's still commonplace in changing rooms throughout the sport. He says it's gone on for too long and that it needs to be rooted out. Rugby's governing body, the RFU, praised him for speaking out and say they want to work with Luther to bring about change. Ian Woods has more.
He played 15 times for England and his professional rugby career took him to 4 Premiership clubs. But Luther Burrell has never talked publicly about the racist comments he endured. Now he says it's time to speak out.
I've been my own worst enemy because, you let one comment slip that you perhaps think, oh, maybe I've just kind of overthought about that comment. When I alluded to like bananas and stuff like this, what have gone on and certain issues that have been thrown at me, and I've just kind of let it go.
He says the worst moment came when he and teammates discussed using sun cream on a hot day, and one of them referenced slavery and shackles.
When someone mentions the word shackles and slave as a bit of banter on the back of putting sun cream on, when the word slave's getting chucked around, there's a line. Trust me, you've well overstepped that line. And I don't believe it was coming from a malicious place. I love having a laugh and love having a good bit of crack. But there's things that you just cannot say. And when that got thrown out there and it kind of was like laughed at, and I just thought, no, I'm not having this.
The reaction inside the game has been supportive, with rugby bosses both apologising and applauding Burrell for going public. Bill Sweeney, the chief executive of the Rugby Football Union, said he was disturbed that this has been Luther's experience, while Simon Massey-Taylor, the chief executive of Premiership Rugby, said it's a reminder of how far we still have to go.
Luther Burrell said the experience of cricketer Azim Rafiq helped encourage him to go public. The racism he reported led to an upheaval in the way Yorkshire Cricket Club was run. But Burrell says he'd prefer not to name names and ruin someone's livelihood over something they might now regret saying.
I sort of lost a bit of my integrity by behaving in that manner. And now I just don't want anybody else to be in that situation. I've got 2 children. I've got a daughter and a son that both love rugby. So I'm doing it for that generation.
Burrell's been offered a meeting with RFU executives as they try to turn the negative publicity into a positive driver for change. Ian Woods, ITV News.
Now, criminal barristers have become the latest workers to walk out in a row over pay today. They say the money they get for taking legal aid cases in England and Wales is less than the minimum wage. They've been offered a 15% pay rise by the government, but that won't come into force until a huge backlog of cases is cleared. And with growing numbers of junior barristers quitting, that's only making things worse, as our correspondent Ben Chapman explains.
With the wigs and the placards, they were among the more surprising of picket lines. But despite what some might think, their case to the government today was many barristers don't earn enough to live on. Among them, Rosalind, whose fees are set by the government through the legal aid system. She tells me she used to earn more as a barista in a cafe than as a barrister at court.
I was on a job on the minimum wage before this, and I cannot maintain the lifestyle that I had then. Now I'm going to have to look at other jobs to financially survive unless something really drastic changes.
It's because while a barrister may receive £90 for a single court appearance under legal aid, that doesn't include many hours preparing for the case. It leaves new junior barristers earning around £12,000 on average, though later in their careers half will earn the equivalent of a £60,000 salary. There's already a huge backlog of cases in the courts. Ministers say today's disruption will make that worse. But barristers argue that backlog has been caused because so many of them are leaving the profession. Charities say victims of crime are the ones really suffering.
Victims are waiting 4-5 years to have their cases heard by the courts. In that period of time, they're living with the trauma, the fear, the anxiety of what they've experienced. They're unable to cope, they're unable to recover.
The government says it's already proposed a 15% increase in legal aid fees, which would add £7,000 to a typical salary. But barristers say it won't kick in quickly enough and more strikes are planned.
The key price will be paid by some of the most vulnerable people in our society, victims of crime waiting longer for their cases to be heard. So my message would be, consider the fact we've put this very generous offer on the table.
But many barristers say they're having to look elsewhere for higher paying private and civil cases, leaving the criminal justice system just when it needs them the most. Ben Chapman, ITV News, Manchester.
The Charity Commission says it's looking into whether it needs to carry out a review of donations received by Prince Charles's charity, the Prince of Wales Charitable Fund. The Sunday Times reported that millions of euros in cash was handed over in suitcases and carrier bags by a former Prime Minister of Qatar to the Prince. The Prince's office says all the correct procedures were followed, saying there had been no wrongdoing. And the Queen has travelled to Scotland to begin a week of royal events. She was joined by Prince Edward and his wife Sophie at the beginning of the royal family's Holyrood Week. Her presence was only confirmed early this morning. It's the first time the Queen has been seen in public since the Platinum Jubilee celebrations early this month. Now, Scotland is looking at introducing a law to enforce buffer zones outside abortion clinics. It's aimed at preventing women from being intimidated by protesters. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said national action was needed, but she admitted there would be complexities. Now, Kay Nicholson is in Edinburgh for us tonight. Kay, explain then, what is this legislation going to do?
Yeah, so here's a good example. There's a sexual health clinic just at the top of the hill there on the left-hand side. Now, women who've been going there for abortion say sometimes they're met with pro-life campaigners directly across the entrance. They say that's very intimidating and obviously upsetting for them on what is already a very stressful time. So campaigners want to see 150-metre buffer zones put in place. For example, on this street, that would mean the protesters would only be able to go as far as the bottom of this road, just by the green space, if you can see it there. So today, the First Minister led a summit to discuss putting something like that into law.
There's no doubt
in my mind, and this was reinforced by the discussions today, that we need to find a national legislative solution to this. There are some hurdles to overcome, and in the short term, we need to work with local authorities and with the police to try to ensure that women are able to access healthcare free of intimidation and harassment.
Now, this campaign has been bubbling away for a few years now, but obviously recent events in America have strengthened the resolve of campaigners. One told me today that women's reproductive rights were under attack, making it all the more important to support women here in Scotland.
Kay Nicholson in Edinburgh, thank you. Well, you are watching the ITV Evening News. Lots more to come before Emmerdale. The latest plan to reduce the NHS backlog, offer patients the chance to have treatment in other parts of the country. But will it work?
I'm so much worse and I have to take so many more painkillers. I'll go anywhere. I said to them, I'll go anywhere.
92 and counting, the oldest GCSE maths student now waiting for his results. Raducanu and Murray kick off Wimbledon. They are back, and so is the queue.
This queue wasn't here last year, and I've got to say, it feels as though people have really missed it. This is the first time since before the pandemic that the tournament's been back at full capacity, and that means they're expecting 42,000 people a day.
And rain certainly stopped play here at Wimbledon earlier today. But as you can see, the sun has come out. People are making the most of it. But will it stay out for the rest of the week? I'll have the full forecast a little later in the programme.
So all of that coming up. But first, a special report on how the youngest victims of Russia's invasion of Ukraine are coping after fleeing for their lives. In March, ITV News filmed with some of the many families who'd fled to neighbouring Poland. Now, we heard from children who'd just become the first Ukrainians to enrol in a Polish school. And now we have returned to hear how that kindness has helped them to rebuild their lives. They haven't forgotten the pain of leaving their homes, but remarkably, increasing numbers are now feeling strong enough to return. As our correspondent Peter Smith reports from Poland.
The tiny border town of Przemysl has been the epicentre of Europe's refugee crisis. Thousands of Ukrainians still arrive every day, but it is in stark contrast to what we saw here in the early days of the war. Masses of tired, cold Ukrainians turned up here, holding a few bags and little hope. 4 months on, we've returned to Przemysl. The Ukrainian children now have homes here and a place in the school, but it still hurts to look back on what they left behind.
I even wanted to cry. Missing my home very much.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
All the children here still remember the date they came.
26 of February.
Я дуже не хотіла їхати сюди.
I didn't want to come at all.
Батьки казали, що я сьогодні на 2 дня їду.
But my parents told me we are just going for 2 days.
А зав'язали, що на 3 місяці.
And it occurred that I'm here for 3 months.
In March, I was here when this school became the first in Poland to enrol Ukrainian children.
Там за мною спускає тато.
Everything is alright in general in Poland, but he misses his dad.
Now we meet 6-year-old Vlad once again.
Do you remember this?
Пам'ятаєш це? Пам'ятаю. Ніхто на тебе не кричав так? Їхав у Перемишль.
I do not miss my dad anymore because it happened that he is now in Przemysl. He came here.
Your dad came here?
Тато приїхав.
Yes.
How do you feel now?
А тепер як себе почуваєш, коли вже тато тут?
Дуже добре.
Very well.
Przemysl has a population of just 60,000. At the peak, 50,000 new refugees were coming in every day, all in need of some support. That has put pressure on this place and its people. At the start of the war, ITV News saw Natalia giving psychological help.
Дуже приємно.
The stories she heard were so horrific. She tells us about the effect it's had on her.
I also had like PTSD. I have a trauma, and I asked about psychological help for myself from other specialists.
Coming back here now, I can see how different things are in Przemysl. The train station is still busy with Ukrainian refugees, but these are not people fleeing their homes, they are now returning.
Each day now there are more going back than coming in. People able to return to Kyiv, some here going as far as Kharkiv and Donetsk.
Now I'm going home.
How does that feel?
It's complicated feelings because I'm happy to return and I'm afraid to return at the same time.
I'm very thankful to people who shared their lives with us. It's very, very heart moving.
I'm happy now because come back. I was in Manchester, England.
You were in Manchester?
Yes, my brother lives in Manchester.
The tide turned in the war at home, and so too has the direction of travel here. It means emotional farewells with Polish families who hosted them, but boarding this train to Kyiv, few know what they're going back to, who will still be there, and who won't. After 4 months, home is a changed place. Peter Smith, ITV News, Przemysl.
Okay, well now let's get an update on what's making the news tonight. Rescuers continue to search for survivors after missiles hit a shopping centre in central Ukraine. President Zelensky said it's thought 1,000 people were inside the building, which he says has no strategic value. Here, a man remains in critical condition tonight after an explosion which destroyed a house in Birmingham, killing a woman. And on day one at Wimbledon, a win for Raducanu. Murray is on court right now, and we will have the very latest in the next few minutes. Next tonight, though, NHS England is offering patients who've been waiting more than 2 years for treatment the option to have it in a different part of the country to tackle a huge backlog. Thousands of people are being contacted about the scheme, with some having their travel and accommodation costs paid too. Our health editor Emily Morgan heard from one patient facing an agonising wait.
Stinky. Sarah should be walking down this street. She shouldn't need a mobility scooter. But after waiting more than 2 years for surgery on her knee, she doesn't have a choice.
The weight has caused so much pressure on other areas of my body. Even if I get this pain better in my right knee from having this operation, I don't think I'll ever get back what I have lost through the weight. I don't. I've come to terms with the fact I feel like I'm sort of disabled for life.
She says the NHS has asked her if she'd travel for the operation, but still hasn't been given an appointment.
I'll go to Scotland if I have to get it done. I'm so much worse and I have to take so many more painkillers. I'll go anywhere. I said to them, I'll go anywhere.
Offering patients treatment in different parts of the country is one way the NHS is trying to cut waiting times. At its peak in January, there were 22,500 people who were on a list for 2 years or more. It has fallen to just under 7,000, but the aim is to virtually eliminate that waiting list by the end of July.
We are on track to be able to treat everybody waiting 2 years or more, except, of course, if they have chosen to wait longer or if they require incredibly complex treatment.
But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are more than 300,000 patients who've been waiting a year. Getting that down is even more of a challenge.
We need to have enough staff, we need to have enough beds, we need to have enough diagnostic equipment, we need to be able to get people to the places where there is capacity to treat them. There's all sorts of challenges here that need to be faced.
That might be so, and despite trying to stay positive, Sarah says she feels like she's been forgotten. Emily Morgan, ITV News.
Well, let's get more now on the G7 summit of world leaders in Germany. And with problems at home, Boris Johnson has been using the opportunity to boost his international standing. Our political correspondent Romilly Weeks is at the summit in Germany tonight. So Romilly, what has Mr Johnson been doing to improve relations with other international leaders?
Well, some quite bizarre tactics, Mary. The serious business of this summit has been securing a united front on Ukraine, but Boris Johnson has been bending over backwards, it seems, to build a rapport with fellow world leaders. So we've been treated to the quite bizarre spectacle of him joshing with the likes of President Biden and the German Chancellor over whether they should take off their clothes to try and look tougher than Putin. Have a listen to this, you might be able to make some of it out. You might have thought that would be enough, but no. The Prime Minister went for a wild swim this morning and he spotted Justin Trudeau going for a jog and took the opportunity for more jokes about his pecs. It's hard to see whether this tactic helps or hinders the Prime Minister's cause, but he is facing a far more delicate diplomatic situation coming up. President Putin has just confirmed he will be attending the G20 summit in November. He's been the absent spectre at this summit. He very much intends to be present at the next one, and Western leaders will have to decide now whether they should boycott it.
All right, Romilly Weeks, G7 in Germany, thank you. Here, the radio DJ Adele Roberts has thanked the NHS and confirmed she is cancer-free. The Radio 1 presenter had been receiving treatment for bowel cancer. In a post on Instagram, she described the staff who cared for her as angels. Meanwhile, trainee doctors in Cambridge have been practising on a holographic patient. The students at Addenbrooke's Hospital are the first in the world to use the mixed reality technology. And a rocket has been launched from Australia for the first time in nearly 3 decades. The NASA probe is carrying scientific equipment. It was the agency's first ever launch from outside the USA. The comedian and author Hamza Arshad has told ITV News about the importance of better representation for British Asians and Muslims in mainstream publishing. He's now releasing his latest children's book and says although things are improving, there are still barriers to everyone feeling included. He spoke to our entertainment reporter Rishi Davda.
It looks like the kind of thing detectives might tow out of a swamp.
Story time at school, from a book with inclusivity at every turn. Hamza Arshad's Little Bad Man series is written to reflect today's classrooms, something he didn't see in the library when he was younger.
I would look at the shelves. I know for a fact that back then I wouldn't really see anyone that may have looked like me, or someone that I could see I could relate to or connect with, and I think that's maybe one of the reasons why I didn't really get into reading.
Then I had to tell my mum some important news.
Hamza rose to fame on YouTube, and nearly 100 million views later, the comedic creator is now an author, telling the story of Pakistani 11-year-old Hamza Khan.
I think it's great for the younger generation to be able to have characters that they can connect with and relate to, and hopefully encourage them to read and maybe even become future writers themselves one day.
The children in Year 4 at this school like reading about characters from all backgrounds.
Maybe I can try to compare them to myself. It shows you how the world is and how different people are. I just tell my parents, look, it's like what happened to me and stuff like that.
Like, get out.
Starting out, Hamza felt it was up to him to turn his passion into a career.
I started YouTube because I thought I'm never going to be able to get that opportunity where I'm going to get my own show on or be the main star in a film. And I felt like I had to create my dream myself.
When it comes to diversity in books and publishing, there's still work to do.
Wherever it is right now, it needs to be somewhere else, but the fact that we're making that gradual process, I think that's really important. And I think especially in the last few years, in terms of books, I do feel that there's more representation, which is brilliant.
Tell them that!
Hamza hopes children will start to see themselves in the stories they read. Rishi Davda, ITV News.
Now, there's been plenty for the home crowd to cheer on day one at Wimbledon. Emma Raducanu won in straight sets. Cameron Norrie also made it through the first round. And Andy Murray is on centre court right now. And Chloe Keedy is at the All England club for us tonight. So, Chloe, go on then. A good start, you reckon?
I think so. It's amazing to think that this time last year no one had even heard of Emma Raducanu, and yet she entered this year's competition as a top 10 seed. It's not been an easy run-up though. She's had lots of minor injuries, but all of that seemed to be forgotten when she walked out onto centre court. The crowd was absolutely delighted. A reward perhaps for a day that started with a little bit of rain and rather a lot of queuing. There are few more British sights than this. Resilient and resourceful, this lot weren't going to let a bit of rain get in the way of their queuing. All have been here since the crack of dawn, and many have already travelled thousands of miles, some from as far away as Australia. What do you think of the weather?
Very English. I'm hoping it's going to pass. Yeah.
I need to go back in my cubby.
Actually, it's great because then the tournament has been sort of stopped. And then our players can't continue playing and we can get to see them.
The rain's not going to put you off?
No, committed. I got up at 4 a.m. for this. So.
Now, because of COVID, this queue wasn't here last year, and I've got to say, it feels as though people have really missed it. This is the first time since before the pandemic that the tournament's been back at full capacity, and that means they're expecting 42,000 people a day. British men's number one, Cameron Norrie, got things off to a great start on court 2 by defeating his Spanish opponent in straight sets.
Cam Norrie is through.
A lucky few then took their seats in centre court, first to see reigning champion Novak Djokovic win his opening match against South Korea's Kwon Soon Woo.
Wasn't without some difficulty.
And then was the moment we'd all been waiting for. Emma Raducanu may be the US Open champion, but this was her first outing on Wimbledon's fabled centre court. And after a run-up mired in injury worries, Raducanu reminded us all what she's made of. An ecstatic crowd watched as she took first 1, then 2 straight sets against her Belgian opponent, Alison van Uytvanck. A thrilling first day for British tennis, and it isn't over yet. All eyes are now on Sir Andy Murray, whose campaign for a 3rd Wimbledon trophy has just begun. Well, Murray's been on court for about half an hour. He's playing against the Australian James Duckworth, and they're still in the first set. He's also been an injury worry in the run-up. He's got an abdominal strain, but as one former pro tennis player I spoke to here today said, he has a champion's mentality and he wouldn't be here if he didn't think he could win.
OK, Chloe Keedy at Wimbledon, where the sun is shining. Thank you. So there's more to come on the tennis, including that all-important weather, what it's going to be like.
It's certainly been a lively start to Wimbledon, not least with the weather, but will you need your brolly for the rest of the week? I'll have the full forecast in just a moment.
And proof, if it were needed, that is never too late to learn something new. The 92-year-old sitting a GCSE. All that and more after this short break.
Last week.
Really? Sounds like fun.
Triangle Sarnies, you are the picnic queen. Time for passion fruit martinis, know what I mean?
Effortlessly delicious spa quality cocktails. So whenever you're feeling fine,
it's funky time.
That's a Chromebook with built-in virus protection, so you can click with confidence, with no more of this, and a lot more peace of mind. Switch to built-in virus protection. Switch to Chromebook.
In this Heinz summer of sauces, give it all you've got. Give them moments to remember. Kebabs. But most of all, give it some Heinz.
I've just seen someone abandon their car and run off.
That looks quite concerning.
Keep it on.
Again, welcome back. And as we just saw, Becky is at an action-packed Wimbledon tonight with the latest on the weather. Yes, go on then. What's it going to be like, Becky?
Well, it certainly has been a very lively start to Wimbledon, Mary, and not just on court, with the weather as well. Not least the weather, because we have seen heavy and thundery showers, as you can see. It did stop play for a time, but the sun has also come out today, all taken in the very best British spirit. The only people I think truly happy to see these showers are the weather forecasters. And did we predict them? Yes, we definitely did. I'm very happy to say. Now, this is my first time at Wimbledon, and I have to say it didn't disappoint. I have been going around and gathering up fun facts throughout the day, and it certainly has been very interesting indeed. Did you know that Wimbledon is the oldest tennis tournament in the world, started in 1877? It attracts 39,000 people a day. Over 1.9 million strawberries are consumed during the tournament, and the cost, I found, of each punnet of strawberry is in fact £1.9 million. That is exactly what it is. And certainly we are expecting to see some unsettled conditions over the next few days. Largely dry, I think, though, for tomorrow, Friday and Saturday. Let's have a look at what's happening at the bigger picture across the UK.
Everywhere will be lovely and warm today. You might even be tempted to go for a dip. Heinz Seriously Good Mayonnaise sponsors ITV National Weather.
So very unsettled indeed at the moment, as we've experienced here today. Over the next few days we can expect to see more showers around, some of them thundery as well, windy at times as well. We are expecting things to improve though into next week as well. So let's have a look first of all at this evening and overnight. All the showers that we've had across many central and eastern parts through today are going to clear away into the North Sea to leave a largely dry, clear and consequently rather chilly picture across much of central and eastern parts of England overnight. Further west though, cast your eyes over there and you'll see the next barrage of rain-bearing Atlantic frontal systems just lining up across those western areas and really going to be sitting across much of Scotland and Northern Ireland by the end of the night. Some fairly heavy and prolonged spells of rain, quite windy as well. And then we have a look ahead to tomorrow, and that system, it doesn't really kind of scoot across the UK, it sort of belly crawls its way across the UK. We are expecting it to make very slow progress really just across those western parts by the time we get to the middle of the afternoon. So as a consequence, central and eastern parts of England and indeed here in Wimbledon, we are expecting to see a largely, I'll caveat that, a largely dry day with some decent sunshine, quite warm as well, not so further west where the rain at times could be problematic, and we do have a weather warning in force across southwestern parts of Scotland. And then on to Wednesday. Well, Wednesday and indeed Thursday as well is going to be a mixture of sunny spells and showers, and I have to say on Thursday they are likely to be pretty heavy and thundery as well.
Heinz Seriously Good Mayonnaise sponsors ITV National Weather.
So very unsettled for many over the next few days, but I'm sure plenty of action on court. Back to you.
All right, Becky, thank you very much. And finally tonight, a maths question for you. Brace yourselves. What's 2022 minus 1946? The correct answer is, of course, 76. And that is the number of years since a man called Derek Skipper last took an exam. Now, the 92-year-old has just sat a maths GCSE for what he says is a bit of fun. Derek told Sejal Courier why age is just a number.
While others might think about taking it easy at 92 years of age, not so Derek Skipper. He decided it was the perfect time to go back to school and do a maths GCSE.
Other people try crosswords. I thought I'd try to have a go and see if I can improve my mind, if you like. People did tell me I was a bit daft.
Like other school children during COVID, Derek did his classes over Zoom. But he took the exam alongside a school hall full of 16-year-olds, finding the first few questions easy, but things got stickier as he went on.
You look at a question and think, nothing happened, your brain doesn't work out at all. And you suddenly come back to it and think, hang on a bit, I've got to answer this question. So this is the original slide rule that I took in 1946.
The last time Derek sat a maths exam was 76 years ago, aged just 16. Then he took his trusted slide rule with him.
You weren't allowed to take a formula in, of course. I was able to open up this slide rule and I wrote in sine, cos and tan. And when I closed it,
Nobody could see.
Nobody could see it. So I did cheat a little bit in 1947. And since that time, I've now realised that it's probably best to actually learn it. There was no cheating in this exam, I can promise you.
This time, he relied on a calculator, a magnifying glass and revision.
What else are you going to do with your life? You might as well enjoy it.
He hopes he's passed with a level 4 or 5 and that he's inspired others along the way. Sejal Karia, ITV News, Cambridge.
Okay, Derek A's, I expect. And that's all from us for tonight. Raggie's here with news at 10, but from me and all the team. Bye-bye.